So last night we talked about how little things can make a big difference, and we talked about the concepts of an epidemic, or in the case of something going viral, something that takes that maybe starts small but grows exponentially and almost seemingly out of control in growth. And it was studied, and part of that study we discussed last night were the categories or qualities of these three types of people: connectors, salesmen, and mavens. And for those of you that sent in your suggestion, your thought, I asked everyone here to text me what they thought they were. And it's interesting because some of the answers I got, I went, I may have thought you may have been someone else or a different personality, but I maybe don't know you as well as others. But basically what you see here is over 50% of the congregation that responded believes that they would fit best as mavens. And that's not bad. There's not a bad or good. It's just for us to understand who we have as a team, because as we continue to build this team and develop this team, it's important to know where these categories are and how we can best utilize this team. Now, some of this information we're going to use a little bit further as we go through this week. But basically, I just wanted to reveal to you what the makeup was, what the percentage was, so that you can be thinking about, if you are a connector, how can you engage with a salesman? How can you engage with a maven? How can you engage with the people that can both present maybe the gospel and or help in a deeper conversation of Scripture? So that's the initial thought. So this week, we have been looking at building together brick by brick. And we've looked at the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is an interesting story. Nehemiah takes place around 70 years after the rebuilding of the foundation in Jerusalem, of the temple in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem had been destroyed. 70 years later, they rebuilt the temple. And about 70 years after that, more or less, the walls were in disarray. And Nehemiah was a servant of the king of Persia. And he was not just a servant, but he was the cupbearer. He was a place of authority, a place of respect. And in that position, he received news from some of the people that were around Jerusalem. And they said, the walls around Jerusalem are in complete disarray. They're in rumbles. They're totally destroyed. We need someone to come and help us and look at this and restore the dignity that once was Jerusalem. And Nehemiah heard that, and we studied on Sunday afternoon how that he wept and he mourned over the broken state of those walls, and how we should as well have a heart that is weeping and mourning for those things that are broken. We also saw that after Nehemiah finished his weeping and mourning, he turned to prayer and to fasting to have the courage he needed to go and approach the Persian king. A king so powerful that he could have snapped a finger and caused Nehemiah's death. But instead of being fearful of that power, Nehemiah, with confidence, approached the king and asked for safe passage to go rebuild the wall. He also asked for timber, which the king allowed. Ultimately, the king made Nehemiah the governor of the area. So because of Nehemiah's confidence in the support of the king, Nehemiah went to Jerusalem to help rebuild the wall. And he said, okay, he gets to the wall, and then what does he do? It says that he inspected the wall. And we talked about how we've got to inspect our team, look internally, look at our strengths, our weaknesses, see who we are and what we need to do as an individual to participate in the work that's going to lie ahead. After he inspected the wall, he made a proclamation to the people, and he said, this is what's happening. We have the opportunity. We have the supplies. We have the support of the king. We have the support of our God. Come join me in rebuilding these walls. And the people said, let us build. And they had a heart and a mind to work, as we've been studying all week as our theme verse, that they, for the people, had a mind to work. So they put in the effort and they dedicated themselves to that. So as they approached that and they bought into that vision, they started leaning in and working on that wall. Now today I want us to talk about that concept of building next to each other. Building hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, working together for the work of the Lord. And in Nehemiah's case, I want us to notice not only was Nehemiah a leader in this situation, but there were other leaders there as well. In Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1, then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priests, and built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They built it as far as the Tower of the 100 and consecrated it, then as far as the Tower of Hanel. Here we see the high priest was the first to act. He was the first to act. The first part of the wall that was worked on was by the high priest. Now that says something about the qualities of this individual. It's easy to look at Nehemiah as the only leader or the only hero of the story, but in this part of this, it took some locals, it took some people saying, you know what, we're going to get into this, we're going to be involved. And it took the local leadership to get involved. And it says that they started this process and they started working the work that was needed. This evening, we need to look to the examples of our leaders when we're building the core. Building the core team that's going to be the foundation of the work that's going to happen here in Tulsa. In Matthew chapter 4:19, Jesus goes to his apostles and says, then he said to them, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. We've already talked about it several times that Jesus did not need disciples for himself. Jesus could have done everything by himself. But what did he do? He empowered his disciples. He gave them opportunities. Just like the example of the feeding of the 5,000 when he empowered his disciples and he said, go and find some food for them. When Jesus could have made the food out of thin air. But he gave them the opportunity to serve in that way and allow for the child to deliver his gift to the disciples to be used. What did Jesus do? He built a core of people. We think about the 12. And it's interesting when we study the 12, because when we study the 12, we see the qualities that made up the people that Jesus spent the most time with. You know what's also interesting about studying the 12? We see a lot of imperfection. We see a lot of flaws. We see a lot of mistakes. We see a lack of faith. We see misunderstandings. We see conflicts. We see between brothers and between disciples. We see all of those things. Yet these were the people that Jesus said, I no longer call you servants, but I call you my friends. This was his core group. These were the people that were with him throughout his ministry and through thick and thin. They were with him through many of the times of persecution. And it wasn't just the 12, but also the Marys and the Marthas and Salome and others that were there, a part of that work, that were committed to him and part of his ministry. Jesus built a core of people that were with him and he worked with. So initially, we need to think of this. The high priest couldn't have built that wall by himself, nor Nehemiah couldn't have built it by themselves. They needed a team. And we need to have a mindset within the leadership that we need a team of people working hand in hand to accomplish this task, not try to take it all on ourselves. But notice what happens once the high priest commits himself to this. What happens next? It says, next to Eliashib, the men of Jericho built, and next to them, Zachor, the son of Imri, built. And you continue, and I said we could read the whole chapter, but that's a whole lot of names I can't pronounce. But by the end of it, in verse 32, it says, and between the whole room, in between the upper room at the corner, as far as the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and the merchants made repairs. And if you were to read the entire chapter of Nehemiah chapter 3, you're going to see a familiar phrase time and time again. And that's this: next to them, next to him, and besides them. And what happened was they continued step by step, section by section, all the way around the walls of Jerusalem. All of the gates, all of the towers, all of the walls. Now, you might ask, how many groups worked on this wall according to Nehemiah chapter 3? And I let my handy-dandy friend, AI, answer this for me. And shockingly, there were 42 groups that were building that wall. 42 was the number of groups that walked and worked all the way around the wall. That was a lot of commitment. Now, that's not individuals. These are just families. These are just leaders, nobles, priests, and so forth. But 42 unique groups and teams working all the way around the wall. When that happened, they became a team. They became a core group of people committed to a cause. They were working side by side, shoulder by shoulder. They weren't off doing their own thing. They weren't off running their own ministry or running their own project, but they were working as a team to fulfill a mission. And I think about the united nature of the disciples after the resurrection of Christ, after His ascension, and in the time of Acts chapter 2, when they proclaimed in the day of Pentecost and convinced so many people to come to the Lord. But once they became obedient to the gospel, they now had a larger team. They had a bigger group of people. And that group of people needed to be connected in. They needed to be engaged. They needed to have a sense of purpose, a family. They needed to be brought in and not just stay in the periphery, not just stay in the fringe, but be brought in. And there's a system to that. And Acts chapter 2 verse 44 says, now all who believed were together. Not some that believed were together. Not a few that believed were together. All who believed were together and had all things in common. Not some things in common, not what is convenient to share, but all things in common. They sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all as anyone had need. There was a sense of purpose. There was a sense of unity. There was a sense of family. They were creating a culture that was not about the me, it was about the we. It was about a team, not about the individual. It's not about who can go first in line. It's not about who gets the best seat at the table. It's not about any of those things. It was about how can we share? How can we be one? How can we care about each other in the most real and authentic way? Letting ourselves be last. Letting ourselves be secondary. Now there were some that didn't honor that. Some that wanted to keep back some of their possession. But there were others that gave it all. And they were united. And there was a core that was united. And as a congregation in Tulsa, you've got to be united. You've got to have a core that's united. Now, does that mean everyone will be united in that same vision and mission and purpose? Not necessarily. Not at first. But you've got to have a core group of people that are. Because if you don't have a core group of people that are pulling the rope in the same direction, then what's going to happen? You're going to fail. Sometimes we say, well, I just want someone to help. Don't pull the rope in the opposite direction. Just put your hands on the rope and pull with me. And that's what they had in Acts chapter 2. They had a people that were of common mind, common priority, common focus. They were united in those ways, and that doesn't happen by chance, and it won't happen by accident in Tulsa. It is intentional that we can be united. And the Bible tells us how we can be united. It says in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24, and let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. You know how you can stay united? You can spend time together. You can spend time together in worship. You can spend time together in fellowship. You can spend time together in outside activities. You can spend time together at the drive-in movie theater. You can spend time together delivering cookies to the police officers or playing in the park or singing instruction. You know, this morning we had a singing instruction. We had several of our men who are still, gainfully employed, unable to be here. If you want to see the picture of our alto soprano section versus our tenor bass section, it's quite comical. But what we did have is we had some of our more seasoned members of this congregation who came and participated. We're part of it. They could. They had the mobility and the time and the ability to be here. And you know what that was? You know how many kids were smiling? It was an encouragement to the kids. It was encouragement to the young families. Young families, you can be an encouragement to those that are older by greeting them, being excited about their life, excited about their stories. I've heard great stories this week. I've heard stories about this congregation from 30 and 40 and 50 years ago. I've heard stories about people baptized. I've heard stories about life. And that comes from those who have lived. We can listen to those stories. We can be engaged in those stories. And we can find unity in those things. Caring about each other. Worshiping. But when we come together, we've got to not forget the purpose. We're coming to assemble and praise God, and that's where we find the unity. The fellowship is awesome. But like we said the other day, if it's not purposed, if there's not purpose behind it, then it's just having fun. Have purpose in the things that we do. But all those things should point back to our core mission, our core being, and that is to seek and to save the lost, and to be a place of worship and praise to God together. One body doing those things. Now, what are some of the signs of a united core? You know, there's some evidence that we can see when there's unity in a congregation. And I can tell you, as I travel place to place, it's apparent when there's conflict and strife. You can see it. You can see it in how people greet one another. You can see it in how people react when a song leader gets up to lead the song that they always lead. You know, you can see it in the faces. You can see it in the emotions. You can hear it in their voices. There's signs when there is disunity, but there's also signs of unity. And one of the things I've noticed this week is a lot of signs of unity. But what's more important than what I see is, what do you see? Do you feel unified with your brothers and your sisters in this congregation? Do you feel like you are sharing the same vision, pulling the rope in the same direction? Well, what are some of the signs of a congregation that's united? Well, one of those is found in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. It says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. When your brother and sister is carrying a burden, are you carrying the burden? Well, that's their problem. They got themselves into that mess. They can get themselves out of the mess. Or are you empathetic to what's going on in their life? The struggles that they're carrying? What about the sinful decisions? What about the sin that they may be carrying and the burden of sin? Do we say, well, that's between them and God? That's up to them. Or do we care? Do we engage with them in a way to be helpful and concerning, to pull some of those burdens off their shoulders, to allow the burden of sin to be left at the cross? If there's a time for hard conversations, do we love them enough to have those conversations? Are we bearing one another's burdens? Are we going through life as if our burdens are our own and their burdens are their own, and we just are sharing the same building a few times a week? Or do we have true sense of unity in these burdens, caring about those burdens, having that accountability with one another? What about what we read about in 1 Thessalonians 5:11? Therefore comfort each other and edify one another, just as you also are doing. What about in the areas of comfort? You know, when someone is distressed, do we feel that distress? Do we comfort those that are in sadness? Do we care about them in that way? Do we lift and edify them? A united congregation has a sense of oneness when it comes to comfort, a sense of oneness when it comes to edification. Also, Romans chapter 12:15 says, rejoice with them who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Do we rejoice at the good things that happen for someone else? Or do we find it a time of envy or, well, that's not that big of a deal? Maybe it would have been a big deal if we'd done it, but it's not that big of a deal. Or do we rejoice as if we're the ones that received that prize? We're the ones that received that promotion. We're the ones that received that straight A. Because we should rejoice with our brothers and sisters as if it is us that is receiving that good news. And on the flip side, we should mourn with them as if it was us who just lost that child, or just lost that spouse, or just lost that friend. We should weep with them in that same way. We should be completely united in those senses and in those emotions in those ways. Because once we are no longer thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about them. We're thinking about them. How often have you just stopped and thought, when's the last time I pitied myself? Well, we throw our pity parties, don't we? Boy, life is hard. I'm tired. I'm stressed. I'm this. I'm that. the less time we spend on ourselves. I say the best self-comfort is serving others. The best way to get over that depression or sadness in our minds is to serve others. Because the moment you stop thinking about yourself and you start thinking about them, God shines the light on you. Make it about serving one another. And if you're a united core, if your core group of people are rejoicing with each other, are mourning with each other, are edifying with each other, are comforting one another in such a way that there is no distinction between each, then you have found a core. You have found a group of people that are committed, truly committed to each other. And if you have that, then guess what? It's time to grow. One of the worst things that could happen to a congregation is have a very good core and then go, we did it. Check mark, perfect church. Checked off. Because guess what? That's not the mission of the church. The mission of the church is not to have the perfect core. The mission of the church is to go make disciples. And guess what people in the world have? Problems. And guess what you're bringing into the core? Problems. But you've got to have a mindset, and that's why it's so important you have a united core, because if your core is dealing with problem after problem after problem, you're just bringing more problems into the problem. So you've got to clean up your mess. You've got to clean up your rubble. You've got to be prepared as a body to grow. That means getting over things, having tough conversations, being transparent and honest. Sometimes those are hard. And tomorrow we're going to talk about the internal conflicts that we can have as a body and what that might do to what we think is a perfect situation. But I want us to take and make the assumption that once we are there, we know what's next. And that is it's time to grow. And it's a time to expand the team. In 2 Timothy chapter 2:2, and the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. You know, there's going to be some that come and there's going to be some that go. Lacey and I were talking about this today on our way home from lunch. We're talking about, we've been in Harlingen for 18 years. 18 years we've been in Harlingen. And we counted up, and I told her to stop the count because I wanted to. But we counted up 18 families that once were actively engaged in the Harlingen congregation in the time we've been there. 18 families that have been actively engaged who are no longer there. Some have died. The enemy of time. They caught up and they're gone. Some have left the church for the world. And they have left the faith. And they're gone. Active members of the congregation. Actively participating, and now they've left. We have some that have moved on to other congregations and are actively supporting the work in other places. But 18 families. Some of those families had 4 or 5 kids. Some of those families were large. Some were smaller. But there are more people. Now, I mentioned the other day, we've been averaging in the mid-90s as a congregation. There are more people counted in those 18 that are gone than the people we have there right now today. Isn't that crazy? A lot of people have come and gone. And your core will change through time. And I look at our core from a few years ago, and it's different than what it is today. I happen to like the core we have now the best we've had. But that's taken 18 years to build that core. But you know, we're one car wreck away. We are one bad diagnosis away. We are one unemployment away from that core being changed. Things outside of our control. But you know what we can't do? We can't sit back and say, well, we've made it. We've got our perfect core. Harlingen has never been better. Let's keep it the way it is. We don't want any more problems. No, we've got to stay active. Same in Tulsa. Expanding the team. And the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit thou to faithful men. You've got to take what you've heard, commit it to people that then will do what? Will be able to teach others also. You've got to take the message and equip the men and the women of this congregation to go and make more disciples. You know, there is a multiplying power of disciples making disciples. If you rely on evangelists to make a disciple, they can only make so many a year, at max. Even the best ones can't do that much. But you know, if that evangelist can bring in 2 or 3, and each one of those 2 or 3 just brings in 1, how much can this congregation grow? And that's why we talk about things like connectors and salesmen and mavens and understanding your role and understanding how you can support the work of the church here. It's because if you can just bring one because you're a connector and you can make one connection to a salesman in this congregation, someone who can go present and convict on the gospel, then you've done your part as a connector. If you're a maven and you've studied the Word or you've got a skill set that can be contributing to the effort of the church, and you can change that tire and open the door of opportunity for someone else to convert them. There's so many ways you can contribute and add to the team. But if each contributes their talent, the church will grow. Expanding your team. In Acts chapter 16 and verse 9, sometimes expansion comes from places you don't expect. In Acts chapter 16, verse 9 says, "In a vision appeared to Paul in the night, a man of Macedonia stood and pleaded with him, saying, 'Come over to Macedonia and help us.'" I will tell you, some of the opportunities that I've seen in my life have come from unexpected places. About 16 years ago, we had a family come over from the neighboring congregation. He was a deacon in the other congregation. He and his wife came over to our congregation and said, "Hey, things are going in a direction we don't like. We want to be a part. We want to see what's going on here." We study. They became a part of us. And this individual said, "Hey, I don't know if you have a problem with this, but there's a children's home in town. And I've been on the board of directors of this children's home. And I want us to be engaged, if that's possible, if y'all don't have any problem working with the children's home." And we said, "Well, yeah." So a couple of us became tutors at the children's home and did tutoring with the children at the children's home. Fast forward 16 years later, we have Chase Palmer as executive director of that children's home. We have families that have jobs and have been able to be touched through the work there. We have families that were employees there that because of the education, the teaching, and the leadership have come to know Jesus through that. Did I see that opportunity as, hey, this is going to be the path where we get so many families and so many opportunities? No. It was an unexpected opportunity. But if we're not looking, we're not going to see. If our heads are down and we're just doing the normal thing we've always done, we're not going to see those opportunities. And I don't know what that opportunity will be for you. I've heard great things out of prison works, and I've heard from rehab facilities and homeless. I mean, there's so many different ways. I can't tell you. I don't know where that opportunity will be. But I guarantee you, if you're not looking, you won't see it. And you'll miss it. So keep your eyes open. Wait for that Macedonia call. Listen and be aware. And that's a great way for our senior members of this congregation who have seen things come and go to be observant and to see and to look out. They may not have the energy to go do some of the things they once did, but they can watch and they can hear and they can contribute in a very significant way. Be watching and listening for those opportunities to expand your team. We can expand the team through our evangelistic efforts. And that's not just the one preaching the gospel. I think it's so important. So often it's misunderstood. But notice in 1 Corinthians 3, verses 6 and 7, it says, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither is he who plants anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase." It's easy to glorify the person that gets in the water to dunk them. But that's not the power. That's not what's important. What's important is the working that God does. If anything, we should be wishing to empower each other to participate in that process, not be the dunker, be the baptizer. Why? Because there is humility, or there could be pride that comes up from that. I remember as a young evangelist, I was very concerned as I was fully supported by the church if my letter didn't have enough baptisms in it. What's going to happen? And it sounds silly, but when you're 23 years old and trying to figure out your family, you want to make sure people know you're working. But I'll tell you what, I am a lot less concerned, we should be a lot less concerned about who does the baptizing. What we need to worry about is, what do we do once they're baptized? Because I'll tell you, that's not the hard part. Hard part is watering. The hard part is spending the time and nurturing and tending to those little plants that need to take root and to grow. But at the end of the day, it's God who gives the increase. So whatever your talent is, whatever your ability is, use it for the gospel. In any stage, be the encourager. Be the person that is the good, firm handshake when they walk in the building, or the pat on the back, or the funny joke, or the Werther's original. Whatever it is, do your part to contribute to the support and the success of a new Christian coming into this body. And you do that, you're going to expand the team. People are going to want to be here. People are going to want to be a part of things when they feel welcome and invited and encouraged. Another way we can expand the church is, frankly, to have more children. And in Proverbs 127, verses 3 and 4 says, "Behold, children are the heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth." We can't minimize the importance and the effectiveness of raising godly children in the church. Now, you can say it's, this or that about how I word it or phrase it, but we need kids and we need children. But what we need is fathers and mothers who are committed to raising their children in the church. And we say raising them in the church. That child at some point is going to have to make their own decision. Then they're going to have to make a decision whether they obey that gospel or not. Because truly, no one's actually raised in the church. They're raised in a home that promotes the gospel maybe, but you don't become saved because of who your parents were and where your parents took you. You're saved based on your faithful act of obedience to God. But what can we do as a congregation? We can promote an atmosphere and a culture that promotes children and engaging the children and putting emphasis and priority and focus on the children. Every single person here at one point was a child. Let's recognize that. And let's spend effort. Yes, we'll spill a Coke on a chair. Who cares? It's a chair. We have children. We have children who can grow up and serve God. That's what matters. We had someone freak out because we had a melted crayon on a pew one time. You know where those pews now are? I think they're in Belize because we got rid of the pews. But this was the end of the world. There was a melted crayon. I said, from a kid, we want them, right? We want the kids. Yes, sometimes kids run. Sometimes kids knock over things. We got to love them. We got to want them. We want them to feel loved. And not that the church is a place to be held into a straitjacket or held and confined, but a place where they're loved and where there's warmth and where there's encouragement. When they sing, that they're praised and encouraged, and when they stand up and they try to do something of service, that we thank them. Love the children. They are the current of the church. They're not the future. They're the current of the church. Because just like this, they're adults. Just like this, the congregation shifts and changes. But what are we doing? How are we watering? How are we encouraging that team now? Recognize the value of your children. Pour into them in the church. Because we are of a deeper calling. I could ask a question. I could say, why are you here? And I think that's a fair question. So I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Why are you here? Are you here because it's been the tradition of your life to come to this building? Are you here because you want something? I mean, those are real reasons why people come to church. I came to church because I want something. Is that why you're here? Are you here because of some political or social gain you could have? I can tell you there's probably a few buildings in town that would help you more politically. But are you here for some social reason or some political reason or for some traditional reason? Or are you here for a deeper reason, a deeper purpose? Because if you're not here for the purpose that Christ has called us into, if you're not here because the power of the gospel changed your life and you want to take that good news and share it with the world, if you're not here to give and to contribute and to pour yourself out at the altar and say, God, take me as I am, use me for your use, then this church will not grow. Or this church will grow, but it won't grow with you. You have to make a choice. Are you all in? Are you part of this deeper calling? 1 Peter 2:9 says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, His own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light." You are a chosen generation. God has called you for a greater purpose and a greater meeting. God has called you out of darkness. And will you be prepared? Because the enemy is at the gate. Conflicts will come. And are you prepared to stand together when those conflicts are here?